One of the things about human beings that's unique is that human females are picky maters. They're choosy. They're also sneaky because you can't tell when they're ovulating, and with many other female animals you know. They have hidden ovulation and they're choosy, and they tend to choose men who are more successful in the dominance hierarchy. Well, there's a shock. I mean, if you pick someone who's at the bottom of the competence hierarchy, well, that's probably not going to work out very well for you. And since women bear the burden of reproduction, it's perfectly reasonable for them to search out someone who's going to be helpful. So productive, fair, generous. And you know, when you think of a dominance hierarchy, you might think, well, it's the powerful guy, the aggressive guy, say, that rises to the top of the dominance hierarchy. And that's not true. It's not even true among chimps. Like, you can get a chimp tyrant, but then what happens is other chimps gang up on him and tear him to pieces. And they don't do it nicely. They don't do it nicely. And the chimps that tend to maintain their dominance for long periods of time have a pretty wide network of friends, roughly speaking, with whom they engage in reciprocal interactions like grooming, and they actually pay a lot of positive attention to the female chimps, who have their own hierarchy, by the way, and to their offspring. So they're like baby kissing politicians. And so the idea that it's raw power that produces dominance it's just wrong. It's wrong now, you know, tyrants, you know. It's a pretty damn unstable business being a tyrant. There's lots of people who want to kill you. Plus, you know, you tend to rule over something approximating hell. So maybe that's better than being a subject in hell, but it's not much better. Anyway, so this social. Now, so what this means, think about this for a minute. You know, imagine that what I'm telling you bears some vague resemblance to the truth. I think there's quite a lot of evidence for it from a biological perspective. I mean, this choosy mating thing occurs with lots of species, you know. There's this bird called the bowerbird. You got to look up bowerbirds, man. Those things are, you just can't even believe they exist. And so the male bowerbird, he makes this really complicated nest that's close to the ground. He weaves it. It's really quite nice. You couldn't make one. So, and then he sweeps the yard in front of the nest. And then he runs around the forest, or flies, because he is a bird, finding pretty things. So maybe he'll find a nice collection of red leaves, and so then he'll take the red leaves one by one and fly back to his front yard and make a little square. You know, he's a bird, so it's not a great square, but he makes a little patch of red, and he takes a look at that, and then he goes off and finds something blue, and he decorates. He makes a little piece of abstract art in the front of his nest. And a lot of male bowerbirds do this all at the same time. And so then the females come along, they hop on something nearby, and they kind of look at it like this, checking it out. And if they're happy with it, well, then things proceed. But if they're not, they fly off to someone else's piece of abstract art. And if a male piece of art is rejected by like 3 females in a row, he gets irritated, brushes it all off with his wing, and then he makes another one. It's like, God. Well, they obviously have a very well developed sense of beauty. It's so cool, you know. And I guess the idea is that, who knows what the hell the idea is. The female birds like artistic males, something like that. But if you're thinking about it biologically, maybe it's an indication of intelligence. Right, it's a marker of intelligence. You know, and it's certainly the case that female humans prefer creative men. So, and no wonder, of course. We wouldn't be creative if that wasn't the case. So then imagine that there's 2 primary forces of evolutionary selection operating on us, and they're not really the natural world, which is what people always think, like the environment, you know, the animals and the trees and nature. But it isn't nature that selected us. It's 2 other things. Well, partly. It's 2 other things. So one is the dominance hierarchy. The male dominance hierarchy is one of the primary mechanisms of selection. So it's like, women are faced with a hard choice, which guy to go after, right? That's a hard choice. Well, so they do the same thing that people do with the stock market. They outsource the cognitive problem, the computational problem, to the male dominance hierarchy. Then they just let the males sort themselves out, however they're going to, and then they peel from the top. And so what that means is the male dominance hierarchy itself is a selection mechanism. Because if you fail at it, then you don't leave any offspring. And so what that means, at least in part, is that we have adapted to be better and better at attaining status in dominance hierarchies over God only knows how long a period of time. And that doesn't mean just power. You know, it might mean cognitive flexibility, because you could imagine dominance hierarchy A, dominance hierarchy B, dominance hierarchy C. Okay, so if you're really successful, you climb up dominance hierarchy A. Right, but you'd B and C, no, if you hadn't landed in those, you'd just be a failure. So then you could say, the ideal human being is someone who can climb to the top of a dominance hierarchy, no matter what the dominance hierarchy is. We've evolved such that success across the set of possible dominance hierarchies is the target. And I think that's why we have general intelligence. Because general intelligence is a general problem-solving mechanism. And it's a single factor even. Like intelligence is a single factor. It's not divisible, despite what people like Robert Sternberg and Howard Gardner falsely claim. So, and then from the female perspective, females are the next gatekeeper. And that's why they're often Mother Nature. It took me a long time to figure this out. Why the hell is nature feminine in mythological representations? It's very, very, it's extraordinarily common. Mother Nature. You don't think of Father Nature, you think of Mother Nature. It's like, why? Well, nature brings forth new forms, so that's feminine. And nature selects. In fact, that's the definition of nature from a Darwinian perspective. Nature is that which selects. Women select their nature. And that's partly why far more men than you might think, like far more, are terrified of women. Because to be rejected as a romantic partner by a woman is to be classified as vaguely acceptable life form. No value in propagating it, though. Right, so it's a major, major rejection. And, you know, I've had dozens of clients, and many, many people write to me whose primary problem is that they're so terrified of women they can't even approach them. Very, very, very common. The selection mechanisms that determine what happens to you in relationship to the next generation, say, are selecting you on the basis of your action and your behavior. I would say they're selecting you on the basis of your values. So, because, you know, if you're an idiot, say, and you go charging after a lion and the lion eats you, then the nature of reality, so to speak, is rendered a judgment on the value structure that sent you down that particular path, right? And so you're being selected by natural forces as a consequence of your behavior. Now, and then we can extend that argument, especially in the human case, or in the case of any organism that's also subject to sexual selection. And human beings are tremendously subject to sexual selection. Now, Darwin was a great believer in sexual selection. You know, he thought it was at least as important as the selection of the organism by the natural environment, whatever that is. But, you know, biologists really had a hard time with that. They kind of ignored sexual selection for like 100 years, which is quite interesting. I think it was partly because sexual selection implies, especially when you're dealing with organisms that are sort of conscious like human beings, that choice itself is a determinant of evolutionary processes. And you know, the strict deterministic materialists didn't really like that, and they couldn't really come up with an argument against it, but they sort of shelved the whole topic for a very long period of time. But one of the things we know, for example, about human beings is that females are very sexually selective. Female humans, as opposed to, say, to female chimps, which aren't. So part of what's occurred to select human beings for the way they are is the choices that each gender has made with regards to action and belief, but in many ways more specifically female choices. So it's kind of interesting. The next time you're irritated at your boyfriend, let's say, then you can just remember that, you know, untold millions of women have chosen men so that they're exactly like he is, and so, you know, you can't really blame him for that. So, all right, so but here's the thing that's tricky from a scientific perspective, eh? If it is your behavior and your value structures, if your value structures determine what you're interested in, how you behave, and selection pressure occurs as a consequence of your actions, then doesn't it mean that the structure of the value systems that drive your behavior have to be regarded as true or real in some scientific sense? Because the Darwinists basically say, look, the best solution is the solution that you embody. There is no higher solution than that. And there you are, embodying a solution. So in what way, I don't understand in what way that can't be regarded as real. You know, because people think of things like value structures as epiphenomenal. You know, they're not real like material is real. But I don't get that. I don't see how that works with Darwinian thinking, because you're interacting with each other all the time, and you're doing that on the basis of your capacity for action and the value systems that drive that. And obviously those have some effect on whether or not you're selected by women, say, or by men for that matter, but also by the natural world.